Welcome to another episode of Agelust, where we are fearlessly walking into those uninhibited years, merging desire and wisdom, venturing into new paths without regret. I'm Jessica Badonsky, your host. I'm a board-certified nurse practitioner and certified menopause provider. Today, I am talking to Courtney Brame. Courtney is the founder of Something Positive for Positive People, a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to educating and supporting folks around herpes. In this episode, we are going to not only talk about what herpes is, testing, how Something Positive for Positive People came about, but practical ideas on how you can either disclose or understand a partner who's disclosing to you that they have herpes. Quick word of warning. I have potty mouth. I curse. I may even curse in this intro. Second word of warning. While I am a nurse practitioner, I am not your nurse practitioner. So anything you hear is not advice. It is not a prescription. You must talk to your providers, your healthcare team before you make any changes in your health. So sit back, relax, keep an open mind, and enjoy the episode. Welcome to another episode of Agelust. This episode, we're going to be talking about STIs, specifically herpes, which is one of my favorite subjects to talk about. You may be wondering, why would we talk about herpes and aging? Well, 3.9 billion people in the world have type 1 herpes. It's what we usually associate with oral herpes. That's 67% of people ages 14 to 49. That does not include the folks that are in their 50s or their 60s, or maybe even our parents who are now in their 80s, but lived in the free love days of the 60s and 70s. I'm also talking about it because where I live in New York, type 2, which is around 11 to 12%, same age group, 14 to 49 year olds, it's around 22%. That's a lot of fucking people. So when we think about aging and we think about herpes, HSV1, HSV2, and the different stages in our life, you might be one of those people who didn't even know that that cold sore that you had was herpes. So just know that there are a lot of people who have herpes. Courtney and I are going to dive very deep into not only what herpes is, but his story on how he created this organization, what his organization is doing to support folks, and also some practical ideas on how you can disclose if you need to disclose, or if you have a partner who's disclosed to you. Thanks again for listening, and I hope you enjoy this episode. All right, this is another wonderful episode of Agelust. And today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to talk about STIs. We're going to talk about one particular sexually transmitted infection, and that is herpes, HSV. Herpes is the thing that I love. It is the infection I love to talk about with patients and people. And I was looking on the Instagrams and I was following two people, but it was Coach Belize and the Safe Slut. And that led me to my guest, Courtney Brame, who is the founder and the head of Something Positive for Positive People, whose focus is around educating and supporting folks that have herpes diagnosis. So, Courtney, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me about you. Tell us about who you are, Courtney, and how you started this. It's 5 years, right? 5 years of Something Positive for Positive People, or is it like 7 years?
No, it's 7 years of me interviewing people living with herpes and the podcast. It's been a nonprofit for 5 years. It took me 2 years after starting the podcast to realize that there was this pattern between people who were navigating herpes diagnosis and the suicide ideation or the depression and anxiety that was being expressed to me throughout the course of me performing these interviews or conducting these interviews. And then I learned, I was like, all right, well, maybe I can raise money to pay for people to get therapy if they were struggling with herpes stigma. And that was how I was able to form the nonprofit organization, which will be 5 years old, May 23rd, 2024. But as far as like who I am goes, I am 35, since age is related here. So I started this at age 28, which seems like a completely different lifetime ago, considering where things were, where I was in life and where I am now. I was working at the time at an advertising agency virtually, and I also was working as a personal trainer for one of my best friends. And as I was doing those things, I was also like, I had this secret life, right? And this secret life was this amazing work that I do that I would significantly downplay just to like not have myself, one, maybe become too attached to or have my identity be as this person who is so heavily associated with herpes, right? And over time, it kind of became more necessary that I begin to live out loud in that space and allow for my identity to just, be the person who's offering this support and who has this organization, who is facilitating all of these important conversations and these talks and these podcast episodes and these calls that I'm having with people and the social media pages, right? So the more of that I did, I noticed there was this maturing process for me. Like I've obtained a significantly higher amount of empathy over the years, just being able to have very vulnerable, direct conversations with people who I have nothing in common with other than this herpes diagnosis. So I am a heterosexual Black man who is now 35. And over the years, I've spoken with various people of various identities and gender expressions and lifestyles and career fields that I otherwise may have never crossed paths with had it not been for the route that I've taken since my herpes diagnosis. And the only thing that we've had in common, initially is that we've received the herpes diagnosis. But once we get through the superficial stuff, we learn that as we work backwards from connecting on that vulnerable aspect of our lives and that connection, we see that there are more commonalities between us, such as, fears or communication styles or challenges that we face, not exclusively related to herpes. But I would say, yeah, I've very much become someone who is more curious. Like if I had to describe myself in a couple of words, like I'm very curious. I pride myself on my consistency and my transparency and utilizing the wisdom that I've attained over the years. Other things about me, I'm a yoga instructor. I have 500 hours of yoga teacher training hours. That's another element that I bring into the Something Positive for Positive People organization. And it's something that I utilize for myself in order to stay grounded and support my stress management. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that was excellent. First of all, I want to say, as far as I know, starting a 501c3, starting a non-for-profit and like getting those numbers and that letter is no easy feat. So like I give you so much credit to do that. That is amazing. And there's also a huge difference, I feel, well, at least for me, from being in my 20s and then like firmly into my 30s, which is now gone. So my mother used to always say, and I remind my children, in your 30s, life gets good. And in your 40s, life gets hot. She really stopped after that. She hasn't really said, now she's 83, going to be 84. And so she's like, oh, you're young. But, she proved those two things were right. Right. And then I think that life starts to begin in your 50s in a particular way, but we could talk about that another time. But I do want to acknowledge, I think that there is a huge difference. And to be 28 and to be out about this diagnosis. And one of the words that you have focused on in your podcast is understanding the word stigma. And so I want to talk about that with you. How did it come about that did you get your diagnosis at 28?
No. So I got my diagnosis at, I think I was 20, wait, has it been 10 years? I would have been 24. I was 24. So it was 2013. It was March of 2013. One day I woke up and I had a fever, chills, body aches, and I stumbled my way into the restroom and I went to pee. And I remember I had what was probably the size of about a nickel circumference of a cluster of blisters on the side of my penis. And it didn't hurt. I just noticed it when I grabbed my penis and I yelled. And my grandmother, who is a nurse, I was living with her at the time. She knocked on the door. She's like, "You okay?" I was like, "No, I need to go to urgent care right now." And so she drove me or my mother, who happened to be in the area, drove me to urgent care. And I was given a visual diagnosis of HSV2. I was given a pamphlet as well as a prescription for Valtrex. I took 2 pills a day for 3 days and the outbreak was gone and it looked like nothing ever happened.
That's changed to 7 days.
Oh, it's 7 now. Ooh.
For your initial outbreak.
Okay. But yeah, I remember 2 pills a day, 6 hours apart for 3 days, and that was it.
Yeah. Wow. But they didn't swab you, nothing like that? They just were like...
I was treated for chlamydia and gonorrhea just in case I was exposed to it. And then I don't think there was a test. I remember a different clinic gave me a swab of my penis. They stuck the Q-tip into my urethra and spun it around. Yeah, that traumatized me. But since then, I haven't had to get tested in that way. Now, I don't recall doing any tests since that visit or in that visit. I've been tested before since that visit, of course. But yeah, it was an experience because the pamphlet that he gave me, it showed me very confusing statistics. It was 1 in 6, 1 in 5, 1 in 4, 1 in 3, 1 in 2. And the language of genital HSV2, oral HSV2, genital HSV1, oral HSV1, genital herpes, oral herpes, HSV1, and HSV2 were all intermingled there. And I guess it was supposed to tell me how many people have herpes, but that didn't mean anything to me because I didn't know anyone who has it.
Right. It's one of those things. I think that speaks to the word stigma, right? So I was looking up that actual word because you had asked, what does that mean to you, to your audience members? And I thought, I know how to use it in a sentence, but what is the definition? So I was looking that up and it says a mark of disgrace associated with a particular circumstance, quality, or person, which of course it goes into the whole stigmata, Christian stigmata thing. So I can tell you what I tell people. So I deal with it on a daily basis, pretty much every day. I'm telling somebody that I think looks pretty much like that's herpes, right? And we talk about the difference between type 1 and type 2. And 67%, according to the World Health Organization, 60 and CDC and Johns Hopkins, 67%. Well, actually, Johns Hopkins has a higher number, but 67% of people ages 14 to 49 have type 1. And then for type 2, it's 11 to 13% I've seen. Again, Johns Hopkins has a higher number of people same age range, 14 to 49. So that doesn't even include people my age. Right. And the fact that little kids will have cold sores all over. And that's, they'll be super young and they're not sexually active at all. And so I'll describe it to people because I live in New York. I'll say if you take all 5 boroughs, you take 100 people randomly, put them in an auditorium from somebody from all 5 boroughs. 67 of those people are going to have type 1. And in New York, our percentage of type 2 is 22%. We're wild in New York.
Hey, that's why I'm moving out there.
Oh, are you going to come here?
So I do a lot of work on the East Coast, typically, between workshops and talks that I do, and a lot of the people who attend virtual events are on the East Coast. So it kind of makes sense to, if I'm planning to be more active, to do so on the East Coast. And like I've been getting nudges into that direction as well. Yeah. Because right now I'm located in Portland, Oregon, and I mean, I think I'm not really needed there. There's a lot of sex positivity generally and openness, and my work centers around getting people comfortable enough to get to that place. Yeah. Whereas like it just doesn't seem needed, and I'll talk about or have support groups out here or out in New York on the East Coast, and there's much higher of a turnout on the East Coast than there is the West Coast. And I can't really speak to what the big difference is.
We have more herpes here.
Yeah, right?
We have double the herpes in New York City, all 5 boroughs. So yeah, I think that's a great idea. There's so much. I don't want to say it's confusing, but maybe it's more frustrating because there's so many folks who talk about sex positivity, but at the same time, they will come into the clinic and present as if they're sex positive and open until they have the diagnosis. And then that stigma and shame is just really painful, really painful to watch. And you were talking about supporting people through having really dark thoughts with having the diagnosis. So when you disclosed and you started talking about the podcast you started the podcast a couple of years later, when did you start? Are you a coach, or when did you start talking to people on a one-to-one basis? Because I think you do that, right? As well, you take private clients.
Yeah, I mean, I don't use clients. I call it coaching because there's just not a better word for it. Yeah. Support calls don't feel right. But people will have a disclosure coming up and want to talk through what they need to say and the perfect words and how can I get this person to be okay with it. And so much of these conversations are okay, well, tell me about you. Tell me about the relationship and why do you like this person? And by the end of it, what we end up doing is just flushing out how they can say everything that they just said to me that they want to say to this person, but just saying it to this person. That's been what all of the calls have been about. So it's not been intentionally setting out to be a coach type thing. It's just been, all right, hey, if you want to talk to me, I ask that you make a donation to something positive for positive people. We can arrange a time. And those are really what the majority of the conversations are. I mean, I'll talk to people. Let's say someone discloses to a partner and they tell the partner, hey, you can reach out to this guy if you have questions. I'll talk to these people as well. So if it's someone who doesn't have herpes or is unfamiliar, I'll answer their questions, in an unbiased way and just speak to and communicate about the realities of it, which a lot of people just don't want to admit that they don't know. And I'm one of the people who will say, all right, well, here's the information that we have. Here's what I found throughout interviewing all these people. But ultimately, nobody knows the answer that, a lot of people just want the answer of how can I keep myself from getting it? And that answer doesn't exist right now. Don't have sex. Don't make skin to skin contact ever. That's how you're going to not get it.
Anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're more like a disclosure surrogate and educator.
Ah, that's good. That's good. Sexual health communications specialist is a good one. Yeah, I like that title.
And I like disclosure surrogate as the other.
Yeah. But another thing too is teaching people who provide sexual health related services how to navigate these conversations and communicate in a way that is stigma free. Yeah. You mentioned stigma being a mark of disgrace, and also, what stigma is. It displays strong characteristics of stereotypes. The kind of person who has herpes is a dirty person, is a slutty person, is a go down the list, right? But when we're able to recognize that a lot of what a person's response might be to receiving a diagnosis is actually their own thoughts about that kind of person, now realized, internalized, and manifesting or expressing itself now with I statements of, oh my God, like I'm now these things. What we see is that a person's sexuality and their identity are extremely interconnected. And part of what it means to be stigma free in the healthcare setting is to be able to acknowledge the person, validate their identity, who they are, who they were, just that 5 seconds before they received their diagnosis, and to be able to express gratitude to them for, being willing to come in, get this treated, and for sharing what they are sharing with you so far. And then to be curious, right? Just like a genuine curiosity about how a person can support them, and also understanding that they may not know what support looks like to them. So being able to have a resource on hand, like something positive for positive people, or utilizing the STARS framework to teach them how to disclose their status, like that's a big deal. When people walk out of that clinic and they've got their positive diagnosis, one of the first things that they are thinking is, okay, how am I going to tell people about this?
Yeah. Yeah. How was it for you the first time you had to tell somebody what's
Yeah,
up?
so I reached out to 3 of my most recent partners. I wasn't out here like that at all. I think I peaked late, but yeah, my most recent 3 partners over the last however many years. I had just graduated college, and I reached out and just asked, hey, do you have herpes? And everyone said no. So that left me with like this feeling of relief, like, oh, thank God I didn't give it to anybody. And I never really questioned, well, who gave it to me? It wasn't a thing for me, because I knew that the people that I asked, no one gave it to me, or none of them had it based on what they said. So that could be a lie, but I think that in the long run, that's really helped me out to not know where it came from, because I had to approach things differently than I would have in that immature state, compared to what I did, in response to not having anyone to blame, which was to figure out like, okay, well, how'd this happen? What did I do? What are some things going on with me?
Yeah. One of the things that I think is really important when we think about disclosing, when we think about where did we get it, sometimes I will have patients come in who are like, I know who it was. Like I know who did this, right? Like that's the conversation. And sometimes there's this sense of shock. And the conversation that I'm having with them as the providers, that their partner may not even know. They may think that a cold sore is a fever blister, is a cold sore, is not herpes. Because you can have, if you have something on your mouth, right, a cold sore on your lip, and then you go down on somebody, not knowing that that's herpes, you can then transfer that virus to their genitals, right? And that's not people do not make that connection. And I actually had the conversation this week with somebody, and I said, no, cold sores are a type of herpes. And she looked at me and she's like, no, a cold sore is a cold sore. And I said, yeah, I understand that, but that is a type of herpes. That is a type of herpes. And we were going in this back and forth. And vice versa, right? You can have type 2, which we usually associate with genital herpes, on your mouth or your rectum or wherever, because any parts of your body that you are having sex with, I mean, not necessarily your fingers, right? But your genitals, your ass, your mouth, right? I even know somebody who had it in their nose. I don't know, they were probably going down on somebody, rimming, doing whatever they were doing. You can get either type there. So, and I think that and sometimes it'll be inside of somebody's urethra, like inside their penis. So I was once doing one of those swabs that you were like, never again, please, never again. If you move to New York, I cannot guarantee that. Okay. And as soon as I started, I noticed that they had like blisters inside of their penis. Now, they would never have known that they were possibly spreading herpes. They couldn't feel it. They didn't know. They already were having burning and itching because of some other stuff that was happening. And that it doesn't become, it's not this malicious infection, of this virus to people. So I like to tell people to have some grace around for themselves and for the people that they're in relationship with or having sex with. So, let's talk a little bit about the STARS method, because I actually saw that as well. And I know that I want to mention, because you have a big conference coming up in May and everyone should get their tickets early bird special, get your tickets, and I'll put a link to your conference. But let's talk about the STARS method. So you said that is one way that a person can disclose. Can you tell me about who started that, how it came about, how to use it, what it stands for?
Yeah, so the STARS framework, and you can find this at www.maketimeforthetalk.com, is created by one of my board members, Dr. Evelyn Molina-Dacker. And the acronym is for safety, turn-ons, avoids, relationship intentions and expectations, and then the second S is for STI status. Now, the way that this works is it's a framework for covering a relationship, the kind of relationship that you want to have. So, if you are someone who needs a certain kind of safety, I'll use the example of social awareness. I am a larger Black man who, if I'm out on a date with someone who is, let's say, I date outside my race as well. So if I'm out on a date with a white woman or someone who could be perceived as a white woman, and something happens and we're laughing loudly, or if we go into a space where we're getting looked at weird for being an interracial couple, or if she yells, right? There are social dynamics that I need for my partner to be aware of before we enter any of those spaces or before we go out in public that could be a threat to me if she's not. So that is a way of discussing safety as an example. The T is for turn-ons, and T and A kind of go together, the turn-ons and avoids, because this is kind of where your boundaries form, right? So I enjoy these things. I don't enjoy these things. I prefer not to drink before a first-time sexual encounter. So these are boundaries that you can set in place with a person. The R is, to me, probably the one that I love to start with whenever, and it's relationship intention, right? So if I'm seeking something long-term and you're seeking something short-term, we're not going to be a compatible match. So I don't even have to put myself through the mental gymnastics of preparing to disclose my herpes status, because this isn't going to be what I want. If we are compatible, we both want long-term or we both want short-term, then we're able to move forward, accordingly through the rest of this conversation. And then the last S for STI status. And I think that this should come last because, unless you're like meeting someone pretty quickly and you know that it's just going to be a sexual encounter, then maybe the rest of it is irrelevant. If it's just, hey, we're here to meet each other's needs in this way, then let it be that, right? But all of this is an easy acronym to just remember, to where whenever you're feeling someone, or let's say you're talking about sex in general, and it goes from just talking about sex, like I like these things and the other person sharing what they like, but it becomes talking about what we would like to do with each other and what we want to do with the other person, what we can see. I think that that's the ideal timing for a disclosure and to initiate this conversation so that no one's expectations are off. Because if I know that I have herpes and the other person doesn't know that, when we start talking about fantasies and things we're going to do to each other, that may create some expectations on them that they hadn't planned on having to consider. So the longer time passes between when we go from talking about sex to talking about sex with each other, before I bring up, hey, I have herpes, let's talk about, getting tested, what that looks like, then the harder it's going to be for us to like bring that person back to realistic expectations, because we've all got our own thought processes. So this is you, this is me, and we're talking about sex, and here's the point where sex becomes about with each other. So we're talking about sex with the other person. And if I don't address STI status now, we might go separate ways in what our expectations are. So this person might be thinking, oh, no condoms, and I'm going to assume birth control. And I'm thinking, I got to tell this person I have herpes, blah, blah, blah. We're getting further apart and out of alignment. Whereas the minute we hit that point of sex with the other person, this is where we can begin to go upward together and set our expectations in a way that aligns with us both as two people who are in the relationship.
Yeah, I think that's great. So this is not even, so in a sense, this is just good practice,
yes.
Period. This happens to be with this talk, this make time for the talk is like anytime, whether you have an STI to disclose or not to disclose, doesn't matter. You should be having this conversation before you engage. But in a sexual relationship, but in the sense of if you're just there for sex, you're just disclosing, right? Like, by the way, let's just disclose right now, this is what we're doing. And I think, did you read Terry Warren's book?
I have not, but
Herpes
I heard of
Handbook? You can get it. She's got it online in Spanish and in English. I think she's in your area. She's an NP as well. And she has a thing too. I don't know, whatever.
She's in Washington.
I liked the book. The book is really interesting.
She's in Washington, yeah.
Huh? And she's in Washington? Yeah.
I know.
To me, that's
Pacific Northwest. Yeah.
Okay, so that's like, I said to my friend from Colorado, I was like, I don't know. I think he's in your neighborhood. I don't know. I was like, she's like, no, it's not the same, Jessica. But anyway, she talks about rejection and the fact that if you're rejected, you disclose and somebody says, well, I'm not interested, as best you can to think that they're not rejecting you. They don't know you. They are just rejecting your diagnosis. They're rejecting this, which is funny to me in a sense, because I'm thinking, and chances are they got it anyway.
Yeah. So I like to take it a step further than that. It's not about rejecting herpes. It's more about like rejecting an offer or declining an offer, right? So a lot of people put their herpes in the forefront of their disclosure when the conversation really should be, I don't even know if I like this person. Like, all right, I want to get to know you more. So it really should be about the vulnerability and wanting to connect, more so than it is, hey, I have herpes. Because also in that delivery, like we might be telling somebody this for the first time. They may have never had anyone say to them, hey, I have herpes, like here's what that means. So we've also got to be gentle with them about what their process is of processing that, right? So in our initiating an invite for vulnerability, because that's what it is. You're now making someone, especially in the dating world, right? Someone who might have never had to think about a bigger picture future is now having to think to themselves, wow, if I do have sex with you and I happen to get this, I now have to tell this to people as well and have this same difficult conversation, right? So these are things to take into consideration when having that conversation.
Yeah. I think in terms of older folks, I'm now part of an age group where people are leaving marriages, starting over after decades of being in relationship. And you had that one guest who is 60 something years old, and they had their first exposure, or they found out that they had herpes, that they have herpes. They're living, at 62, I think. And I think that's also, such a huge shift to be thinking, here I am back in the dating world. And also dealing with this diagnosis, and what does that mean, and the baggage that comes from our history, and what we were taught and learned and all that.
Yeah, so much of it is an unlearning process, because there is an internalized stigma. It's sort of like a ticking time bomb. And once you get that diagnosis, that stigma ticking time bomb blows up. And like, now this is not only what you thought about other people, but now you're thinking these things about yourself, right? And so the challenge becomes looking at yourself separate from your sexuality and recognizing that who you are isn't your sexuality, right? It's part of who you are. And when a person receives a diagnosis, it's not, oh my God, like my sexuality is broken. It's I as a whole am broken and I need to figure out who I am. So the minute we can begin to separate our identity and our sexuality and look at these as, part of one another, or rather than like them being the same thing, I think that really does help facilitate the healing process, because so much of this is, who am I aside from my sexuality, right? So if you remove sex away completely from the equation, what you're left with is recognizing who you are from your values, from your characteristics, your things that you enjoy, hobbies, patterns, habits, your career, the relationships that you have, the company you keep, right? The environments that you find yourself in, your interests. All of these things tend to just get forgotten about in place of a positive herpes diagnosis. And that's who a person then becomes.
Yeah. I think that this is where, in the work that you're doing and who you are, is really important as well. And that you're running this organization and you've created that because, you are, to me, you're young, right? You're a Black man. You've told me that you are. My uncle, he's dead, also a Black man who was 6'6", and people were very sweet as could be, gentle. And people were very intimidated by him when he would walk in with his size 16 shoe into places. And, I think that there's something about, and you tell me what it means to you, because I'm guessing that being a Black man, being vulnerable, talking about being more than your sexuality and what society may impose on you. You say you date outside. I'm a white presenting person, if you could tell. My mother is a Black woman. And how does that play into the work that you're doing? Because we can't pretend that it's not. You are who you are. I am who I am. I do what I do. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I don't think I've been asked that in this way. Like, I think people ask me, what's it like being a Black man who has herpes? And it's like, that's a tricky, I don't know what you're really asking me. But in this case, the way that I see it affect my work is, I think that the bar of expectations are really low. So anything that I do, people are impressed by. And what I mean by that is just like, first off, I'm a man in sex education, and men have a perceived notion about us in general. So to be an emotionally aware, intelligent, available man doing something that requires I'm facilitating and holding space for a lot of people's emotions. And that's not a thing that you commonly see from men. That's one component of it. And then to be a Black person doing that as well, that presents another element. And then being a Black man who does it as well, that's another element. I recently looked at the statistics of the survey that I'm taking, and I think about 60% of my Something Positive for Positive People audience is white. And of that, 80% are women or non-binary, a little more than 80%. It's like high 70% are women, and then like up to 5% are non-binary. And I think that there is a component of, I won't sit here and say like the rarity or the exoticness or the fetishization doesn't play a role in some instances of what my success is, or like people's willingness to watch my videos, hear me out, see, what I have to say or what I'm talking about, because it does. And I'm sure that it does. But I think that being as exotic or standing out as much as I do in this space makes it easier for me to stand out, and it makes people more receptive to my messaging, especially now with people prioritizing or hearing things about men's mental health and Black voices. All of these things sort of, if used properly, can send a message and can amplify the messaging that I have. Some things that I've noticed are I don't receive criticism. And partly, I would say it's because of maybe the spaces that I'm in. I do hear from privately a lot more Black people and Black men especially, but not like openly and publicly like I do white women. So publicly, there are more maybe white women who are vocal about my work or who present me with opportunities or who tell people about what it is that I have going on. Whereas Black people, it's like a one-on-one thing and that's it. Like they will never tell another person about it. And this is just it's a different symptom of stigma, especially in Black communities, because we don't talk about these vulnerable things. Like if I'm going to be praised for anything, I think the more common thing that I get praised for is being a Black man who is open about my SCI status, because you don't even hear Black men talk about their sexual health, let alone their sex, let alone feelings, emotions, vulnerability. So it's a very good time. And like, I don't get it right. Like I'm learning as I go. I'm identifying opportunities for growth. I'm messing up here and there. Oh,
No,
all right.
I
did so well. Okay.
You can say,
yeah,
shit, fuck, motherfucker. I do a disclosure. I have this. I even curse at work. I don't give a fuck. I have to say what I have to say, and sometimes fuck is the only word that will do it.
But all of that to just say, I recognize the uniqueness of the space that I occupy and how I present in that space. And I do have to be very cautious about how I move and navigate the space, because what's the word, like transference or something, counter transference, because I talk to a lot of women. And so there have to be like very hard boundaries in place for myself to protect myself and, the work that I'm doing, because lines can get blurred, lines can get crossed. And even in talking about sex, like how I just mentioned the disclosure thing, if I'm talking to someone about sex, that can be easily like picked up on as we're talking about sex with each other or our sex, right? And attraction can happen in sparks from that. So I have to be just very cautious about how I communicate. And I had a thing happen very recently where it was like I don't want to say stalker, catfish, stalker hybrid.
I heard about it. You talked about it on the podcast, right?
So when that thing happened, I really had to like tighten up the ship. And like, I even tell people, you have to like go through the website. I need to know that you're serious now. I can't do the conversations over social media anymore. Like, I need you to go through the website. I need to see proof of a donation to know that you're serious, and we can set up a time to talk and have a phone call if that's what you're seeking. But if you just have like a question or need to be pointed in the direction of something, I can do that. But, I hate that thing had to happen and that it influenced the way that I do my work, because it's been so easy to just like be able to like clockwork, just answer people's questions or get people to where they need to be.
Yeah.
So I have to now, because of this and other things that I might not have talked about happening, be very mindful of that as I continue to exist in this space if I want any kind of longevity here.
I listened to that episode and I thought, this must be so fucking exhausting, to have to constantly try and do good work and then police yourself against people who are, I've had to cut people off myself. It's exhausting. You cannot express. Anyway, listen, I get it. I get it. And I'm so sorry that
It
that
needed to
happened to
happen,
you.
and I'm glad that it happened how it did when it did, because there were no, big consequences. I have the correspondence saved in the event that I need to take legal action, and that's not the first time something's like that has happened, but it's enough for me to like I have to have much more of a professional barrier up for myself so that it doesn't even get to a
Yeah.
point of me, possibly of that being a possibility of happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, all right. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but oh, did you hear this statistic about like herpes? That the Homo sapiens gave herpes to the Neanderthals, and the Neanderthals gave warts to the Homo sapiens.
No, but what I don't know why this made me think of that, but thinking about like herpes having humans, because herpes have been here longer than humans have or something, and like how
Yeah.
funny that
Yeah.
would be, like if herpes communicated with each other and was like, hey man, I got humans, like, oh shit, stay away from me, like I don't want any of that human stuff you got, like they're the worst.
Yeah, right. I tell people, I'm like, did you see that Beauty and the Beast movie? I'm like, so anytime you hear a song, Tale as Old as Time, you think of herpes and warts. And then, the other thing that I like to tell people, and I want to talk briefly, well, not briefly, but I want you to plug your organization. I want you to plug the conference that's coming up. But you had mentioned, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, more of your time, but I want you to just you had mentioned that there are some things that you feel that medical professionals are missing. And what would be a couple things, just briefly, that we're not hitting the mark with?
Can I, all right, so I work as a standardized patient at a medical school.
Oh, yes. I love that you do that. I love doing that. That was so, I mean, I was the
student, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
That was awesome.
So thank you. And I'm seeing from the other perspective of the medical students and how people go into their professional work, how difficult patients can make things as well. So part of the education of providers is also this stigma-free concept, right? I incorporate the lived experiences of people who have had to navigate stigma into sex education, into STD prevention. And what that looks like is sort of kind of like that. I don't want to go into too much detail because we'll talk about this at the conference, but being able to create that space of bridging that gap of communication, because it's not all the provider, it's not all the patient, but for the patient to know, for example, like if you're going into a or if you're going to an emergency room, right? The example that was given to me is like, okay, I have genital itching and I'm going to the emergency room, and the doctor says, oh God, it's just herpes. That's invalidating to a person who's receiving a herpes diagnosis, because they're not looking at it from the perspective of this nurse is used to seeing gunshot wounds and patients dying on a regular basis. So you coming in with genital itching, it's like, oh, thank God, you're going to live. Okay, here's what we're going to do. And they take that as being dismissed. And so I want to also educate the patients. And that's part of what this work is as well, is educating patients on what their options are for resources and everything, so that we can have much better communication on both ends to get people the outcomes that they want. But as far to answer your question, what healthcare providers can do, I think that it's that gratitude and curiosity. This is something that I preach to my students, as well as whenever I host trainings or I host workshops and presentations. I talk about gratitude and curiosity. Oh, thank you. Like, I know how hard it must have been to like say some of these things. I know how hard it is to get here. And then you invite in some curiosity. Like, tell me more about that. Oh, like, okay, how is that for you? And I know that they're taught this, but when I frame it in a way of like gratitude, curiosity, it makes everything else a lot easier to navigate with the patient. And so that's probably like my best piece of guidance for what medical professionals can do. I don't even want to say better, but different.
Let's just briefly talk about testing. I think that, and I could be wrong, So the guidelines say that if you have a blister, if you have a sore, if you have a cut, then we get you swabbed and then we diagnose HSV, herpes. We do not do a blood test to just determine if you have it or not. And I think one of the reasons that I like that personally is because I know people who decided to get the blood test and stopped having any relationships, period. They were told they had herpes. They'd never had a sore, a cut, nothing. And that was it. Stop dating. We're on year 10. Right? So yeah, isn't that nothing, won't do anything. They're so fearful. So what's the kind of feedback that you're getting from your survey? What's the feedback that you get from the people that you work with? What's your philosophy, your thought based on the guidelines?
Listen, I think that the tests suck. And if we're going to just be honest about that, we need to just get rid of unnecessary tests and have one test that people get annually that says positive or negative. People get confused about, because the first herpes test that I got, I didn't test positive enough to test positive, which was confusing to me because it was less than 1.0 of the antibodies. And this might have been when I was exposed to it, but when it got tested, the doctor told me that it just looked like I was really busy. This was in college. And I was just masturbating a lot at this time. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that I might have had some type of infection, but it was just like friction or something. I don't know. Yeah. But that was very confusing for me to have 2 years later, tested positive for herpes because no one can answer the question for me. Was it repeat exposure that led to me becoming positive? Or was it I got exposed at that point in time and over time the virus just replicated itself and then I became positive? So I think that between this and the symptoms of stigma, one consistent test that everyone gets on their standard STI panel until they know, yes, they have it, or until they know that they have it, that's all it should be. It should just be, a regular part of it, because then as more people find out that they have it, or as more people know that they're being tested for it, there can be more conversations that alleviate the impacts of stigma.
Yeah. One of the things that Terry Warren says in their book is she says that talking about it, disclosing exactly what you're advocating for and what you're supporting folks to do is almost better than anything. I want to share with you one thing that I talk to patients about with herpes, and I tell them that it's a gift. And it's a gift, and it speaks a lot to what you talk about, separating the identity of who you are from your sexuality, right? And it gives people because herpes comes out when we are not doing what we need to do to take care of ourselves, right? When the stress, and it could be good stress, like your 501c3 is like blowing up, and you're getting millions of dollars, and you're like, fuck, I was not prepared for this. Good stress, or like, the world is a trash dumpster fire situation that we're living in as well. Oh, look at that. More light. So it kind of reminds us like we need to be taking care of ourselves, right? Whether that's prayer, writing, dancing, massage, whatever that is for you. And then in relationship, it gives people an opportunity to explore their intimate selves in different ways without maybe that body part that manifests the blister, the sore, right? It allows us to do a massage or take care and even express our boundaries, right? And let people show up and meet you at your boundaries. So I think it's kind of a gift.
Yeah.
When people are diagnosed.
I agree that it does invite so much, like it's a screener as well, because it cuts through a lot of the BS of superficiality, and you really kind of get to know someone and how they respond to sexual health conversations. Is this a safe person to be sexual with? If, Like, for instance, a lot of people, a big turnoff for me is when I'm having a conversation, before I even disclose, and I hear the word clean. Like, oh, I'm clean. And I'll just challenge people on that. Like, oh, what do you mean clean? Like, what's that mean to you? Like, oh, I don't have anything. Like, you don't have anything. You don't have a home. You don't have a car. Like, what don't you have? Oh, I don't have any STDs. Okay. How do you know that? When's the last time you were tested? And we get into that conversation, and it's, in the past, it's been I've been getting information from that and like learning how to support people and facilitating these conversations if these are people that they would like to still pursue something with. But for me, like, I know that things just don't work out with that kind of person. That kind of person who will just use that language is not someone that is going to be able to navigate certain types of conversations in an open-minded way. And that's something that I've learned is important to me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So let's talk about the conference coming up.
So it's the Something Positive for Positive People Conference. It's the first one that we've ever done. It's virtual. It is on Thursday, May 23rd, 2024, from 10 a.m. Central Time to 4 p.m. Central Time. And the topic is Sexual Health is Mental Health. We've got Dr. Evelyn Dacker, who is going to speak about stigma in the healthcare setting. We've got Nikita Fernandez, who is a sex therapist and psychotherapist, who's going to talk about stigma from the mental health perspective. And then I'm going to come in and kind of tie in what they're saying to the work that we're doing, because we do have an intervention program that we are launching. It's ready. At this point, we're just trying to get people who want to be a part of it, where we train healthcare, sexual health organizations on offering stigma-free care. And that's just according to our guidelines under what I've been speaking about for the last few years, which is this concept of STI minimization, which emphasizes and utilizes the experiences of people who have tested positive for STIs and integrating that into sex education as well as STD prevention programs. The keynote speaker is going to perform the data analysis on the survey. So right now we're at more than 1,200 total responses to the survey. I would like to have many more people take that survey before we close it and start collecting the data for the conference. But that's the goal of the conference, is to present this information to health professionals who are going to be able to take the solutions that we're offering to managing stigma and also like teaching people to talk about their sexual health. So the goal is to get as many healthcare providers, professionals in this space, mental health professionals. People with herpes are welcome, but like to come in and understand, like, this is what the survey data is being used for, to get it to where we can minimize the impacts of stigma by bringing healthcare professionals practice talking about sexual health and delivering diagnoses in a stigma-free way to their patients. So that's the goal of the conference.
Do they get CEUs? Do they get any credits? Any continuing education credits? Uh-oh, your eyes got big. You're like, what? No.
I know about that.
Yeah.
I need to figure that out. If I can make that happen by this conference, I know that will help with turnout for
Don't
sure.
ask me. I don't know how you do that.
Yeah, I know there's a process,
Yeah.
and I have to pay money, but I think I have to spend a lot more money than I have right now.
You might be able to get a university to help you to do it.
Okay.
Like a community college. Because I know when I did my SARS, do you know SARS, a sexual attitude reassessment? When I did that, I got credits for that from Hunter and the organization was able to do that. So I think you could maybe reach out to some smaller colleges, like maybe state colleges, something like that. But tell us about the survey real quick.
Yeah. So we collect the responses of people who've received a herpes diagnosis, talking about their experience with their diagnosis, interacting with healthcare providers, dating, disclosing, with sex, with outbreaks, with treatments, with the medication, Valtrex, Valcyclovir, acyclovir, frequency of medication, length of and frequency of outbreaks. So we're getting all of that information so that we can speak to it from a statistical standpoint, because the podcast is a qualitative bit of information. I can speak to these experiences, but to have numbers that support that information is super useful, especially going down the route that I'm choosing to go down.
So I'm going to put a link to all of these things. So anything else you want to leave us with as we wrap up? I just want to thank you for your time so much.
Thank you. And I really appreciate us being able to have done this so quickly and getting together as soon as we have. I appreciate you making space for this conversation and having me on. People can go to www.spfpp.org to learn more about the organization. We always seeking donations. There are membership options if you're someone who's seeking weekly support. There's a support group that is available if you go to the memberships tab, you'll see that there's options to join the weekly support group. We meet on Mondays at 6 p.m. Pacific time for an hour and a half, depending on how many people show up. If you join at the $10 or more level, you'll have access to that. The last Monday of the month is open to everyone for free. I just ask that people make a donation. The conferences tab is where you'll learn more about the conference. The survey tab is where you'll learn more about the survey and you can take it. But please visit the website and browse around. We made some revisions to it. There's videos on each tab so you can learn more about it. If you don't want to scroll through everything, you can just hear me talk through what you'll see on the website and how to engage with it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And you're doing amazing work. And obviously it has been a gift for you because you've created a whole organization. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
If you'd like to support something positive for positive people or work directly with Courtney, because he does have support groups as well as educational resources for medical professionals. In addition, there's also a herpes stigma survey that you can fill out. And this is giving people information about sexual health and mental health and how they go hand in hand. And finally, May 23rd, 2024, Something Positive for Positive People is having their first conference on sexual health called Sexual Health is Mental Health. Early bird pricing is on sale, and you can check that out at www.spfpp.org/conferences. Courtney also has his own podcast called Something Positive for Positive People. If you'd like to make a tax-deductible donation, I think you have a couple months before it's tax time, to Something Positive for Positive People, please check out SPFPP.org. Please support this very important work. While I am a medical professional, nothing I say should be used as advice or prescription. I am not your medical professional. Talk to your healthcare team before making any changes. Agelust can be found on any of your podcast platforms. You can hit the bell, you can hit the star, you can like, you can follow, you can give it 5 stars, which it already has on iTunes. And you can also reach out and let me know what you'd like to talk about or who you'd like to hear from. Thanks again.